Hello and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb Keith, and today I am joined by Adam Francisco, Bruce Hillman, and Scott Keith to talk about our little series that we created out of thin air about a Lutheran identity crisis. And we've been going through various descriptors that can be ascribed to Lutherans that have either been historically part of the name or the description, or are maybe added now. And we've been covering what does that mean for Lutherans and their identity as Christians today, and how that we describe ourselves to other Christians, and I think particularly to non-Lutherans, and how we're perceived. And today's going to be the last one, which is, are Lutherans Catholic? There's a couple ways to think about this, so I think I'll just let you guys hedge your own bets on this, or descriptions as we go around. And I think I've skipped you every week, so I'll let my dad go first on this one. I think I've let him go second or third every time, but I think on the one he probably likes the least, I'm going to let him go first, and then we'll
well, thank you.
We'll let the corrections come after that.
So just for the listeners' sake, most of them probably know this, but when we use the term Catholic, this can have kind of two meanings, and people usually identify it by seeing like a small c Catholic or large c Catholic. Small c Catholic is just universal, and it's the idea that God's church, no matter how we sort of break it up here on earth, is universal, or it is Catholic. And that it is sort of this thing that has existed since he instituted it in all times, everywhere, and that is made up of all believers who have ever trusted in Christ alone for their salvation. Large C Catholic typically refers to the Roman Catholic Church. So specifically that, as we've broken it up through history, that church that was dominant, if not primary, or the only church in the West up until the age of the Reformation, and is now still, I believe, the largest Christian denomination on the planet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is, and is actually still growing. And so that's Roman Catholic. So is Lutheran Roman Catholic? Obviously not. There would not be Lutheran if the Reformation would have worked and we'd have just all stayed Roman Catholic. But is Lutheran Catholic as in universal? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes, especially if you believe that that Lutheran theology is the correct exposition of scriptural theology, which would then make it sort of, in a sense, the sort of universal theology because it is scriptural. But it is a Catholic, yeah. It's a part of that universal church on earth.
Cool. Adam, any corrective thoughts or any additions?
Nope. I was going to say basically what Scott said, and I was kind of surprised that he at least acknowledged a small c Catholicity.
Yeah, well, I don't love it, but
what's not okay? So I'll ask that question. What's not to
love it.
What's not to like about it? What would be the objection? Just that it's confusing to people?
Can I give an answer by way of illustration? In a sense, I'm currently listening to the Eric Metaxas Bonhoeffer biography, right? And one of the things that is illustrative of that time in Christian history is that there was a church in Germany that sort of was going along with the Third Reich and actually became the Reichschurch. And then there were movements that were trying to, depending on degrees, trying to oppose some of the things that the Reichschurch was opposing, this confessional movement, ecumenical movement. And one of the things that it sort of illustrated to me is that anytime you sort of lean too heavily in this idea that we have to be small c Catholic, you get into these sort of ecumenical movements, and the amount of doctrinal truth that you're willing to give up to get to that, hey, I really feel small c Catholic or large E ecumenical on this is astounding. Even to the point where, hey, you're going to like this there, Bruce, even to the point where Karl Barth is like, hey, are we giving up too much here to be ecumenical? And it's like, and when Karl Barth is asking if you're giving up too much to be ecumenical or to be small c Catholic, you maybe really got to wake up and say, okay, this can be, you can lean too far into this for sure. But I think it's healthy to acknowledge, the reality that there has been one universal church on earth since Christ instituted it. And especially if you acknowledge that Lutheran theology is the correct exposition to that. So
I like
sorry,
it.
there you go.
I like it, Scott. You're speaking my love language.
Oh,
they
that's
say.
what I try to do. And I even gave good words to Karl Barth for Bruce.
This is a great episode so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bruce, you got any thoughts as a ecumenical person, as a more ecumenical
I'm
person?
an ecumenical person. This is
I don't
news
know.
to me.
You're probably more ecumenical
I'm
than
probably
the
more
rest, but-
ecumenical than you guys might be, but
He's
I
like,
wouldn't
but that's
consider
not
myself an
saying
ecumenical
much.
person. No, I don't really have anything to add. I would agree with everything Scott and Adam said. I think that it's funny to me, like in my church tradition, when we say the Apostles' Creed in church, we take out one universal and holy Catholic church and change it to Christian because people are so not educated on it that they would get confused about, like, well, why are we saying we're Catholics? So there is, I think, if you're in theological circles, this is a debate that people have, but I think on the outside, people just hear Catholic and they usually just assume Roman Catholic is what is being talked about.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's become kind of a troublesome term because of that.
Have either of you, or three of you, ever heard the argument that the Catholic Church or the Roman Catholic Church actually wasn't really a institutional thing, like official, until the Council of Trent? Before that, there was. Okay, so if that's the case, then it makes sense that Lutherans are part of this sort of Catholic tradition. But if Roman Catholicism is an actual thing before the Reformation, I think it doesn't make sense, right? Because then clearly Lutherans are not Catholic in the big C or maybe even the little c sense of the term, because they deviate from the way many of the most important influential theologians of the Catholic tradition taught. Though, to be sure, you look at in the Middle Ages, for example, this 1,000-year-long period, and the literature we have from that to sort of assess what were the teachings of the church at that in the 13th century or whatever is pretty slim. It's just a few prominent theologians, that we have the work of, but we don't know if there were maybe priests in certain parishes preaching the pure gospel. So we kind of hope that they were, but so it's hard to know.
Adam, in relation to that argument, I mean, I've heard I guess the strongest case I've heard from that is that previous councils had not, codified the errors that the Reformation identified, and that the Catholic Church prior to the Reformation just had a lot of diversity of thought in it. And actually, I think you can see that where, like, if you go back pretty early, there is no consensus of the fathers, as like I think Bruce has really said on this show and stuff. There's a lot of difference there when it comes to certain points of theology. Then you can see differences between Augustine and Aquinas. You can see the different schools of thought arise, different types of study that'll even assign names that we still have today, right? You have Augustinians, you got Dominicans, you've got Franciscans, you got a list of different schools of thought. But that at Trent, the churches, the powers that be, reaction to the Lutherans was to codify everything that the Lutherans called an error and say, yes, that is the formal teaching of the church. And that you could probably argue that started happening before Trent, certainly at the various diets that the Lutherans were called to and then called heretics. I mean, at Worms, you're talking like you're condemning Luther as a heretic. at Augsburg, you're rejecting their confession and then doing that. But so that I think the Reformation begins a process of codifying all those errors. But that I do think is charitable way to put it.
Well, isn't it dependent, and Bruce probably knows more about this than I do, but isn't it dependent on whether at the time you were sort of in the conciliarist camp or the papist camp? In other words, who had the authority to determine what was theology and practice for the Roman Catholic Church? Did you need a council to do that? Could the Pope do that? Could it be like a sort of a general agreement on the tradition? I mean, this gets to be one of the troubles within Roman Catholicism, right? Is that you have multiple sources of authority that all sort of, in a sense, have an equal weighting that can be appealed to make your decision for you. And the Reformers, I mean, obviously Luther was rejecting the power of the Pope to do this, and so what the Reformers typically did is they kept calling for a council to do it. I mean, at the beginning, lots of people were leaning into the fact that the Reformers were conciliarists, that they wanted in fact, that's what they kept, give us a council. They never got these councils. They kept getting diets. The diets were not a full gathering. I mean, the hope is at a council that you're going to gather the whole sort of gaggle of bishops and cardinals and everybody to have a vote on something, and that you're not going to be dependent on whoever one person is making a decision at a diet, which is what happened again at Worms and at Augsburg. And so, I mean, yeah, the council finally does, we're saying codified, not codified,
I don't know what.
codify or codify a thing, for sure. But I think the practices were, there's a difference between what can you be punished for and what are you caught doing. And I think some of that was obviously true in the Roman Catholic Church prior to the Reformation and at the time of the Reformation. But it's pretty clear that when people were caught teaching against the Roman Catholic system of salvation and that the Pope or popes got wind of it, they were punished pretty severely. I mean, there's the whole Jan Hus thing.
Little known fact is, while, in the time just before the Reformation, it had functionally been true that the popes had kind of full authority. That was not codified until the 1800s, where the Pope can sit on St. Peter's throne and actually ex cathedra,
speak
whatever.
ex cathedra,
and actually speak the truth as if it was, for the
For
tradition of
Jesus.
God himself. So that's not even codified by the time of Trent. It still remains an open question. I was telling Caleb last week, what I also find interesting about all of this is my Orthodox friends, the Eastern Orthodox friends, in their tradition, they call the Catholics the first Protestants. And that's kind of their term for them. And they see them as being the first schismatics who left, of course, over the icon controversy, but also over the authority of the Pope, over this very issue. Prior to the split between East and West, the East had always recognized the Bishop of Rome as first among equals, as the most prominent of the bishops. So he had kind of, he'd be like a head of state. It would be a modern equivalent for it. He was the representative of Christianity on earth. But in authority, he was equal with all the other patriarchs. That was how it had been done. He had right of first honor, but not more authority. So when the Bishop of Rome started saying to the East, actually, I'm in charge, you have to listen to me, that didn't go over so well. And so the Orthodox actually say that it's the Catholics who seized power and control using the icon controversy, because they worshipped icons and the West said that was idolatry. But it really was an issue over the authority of the Pope as well. So this thing has this kind of papal authority question has been in place for a long time, and it's caused a lot of problems.
And Rome believes that the East is heretical.
Yeah, they're weird with the East. They you're right. When push comes to shove, they say they're heretical, but then they also will have communion and stuff with them.
Well, they also have orders that can do dual purpose with the East, which is weird.
Yeah.
That is.
Isn't Melkites? Melkites can do dual purpose with some of the Eastern orders.
Yep. Yep, and then you have the Coptics, which is kind of like the forgotten Christians. The East doesn't consider them right. Actually, no one really considers them right. So that you have all these different strange splits that
The Coptics are the Lutherans of the Catholic world.
kind of.
Yeah, but aren't they monophysites?
They are.
Coptics?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's so hard with them because everybody does, like critique, obviously, big error in their theology, but then they are often so persecuted that you have you're like in this position of like really sympathizing and praying for Coptics all the time because, they are so persecuted.
And their tradition is pretty stable. That doesn't make it accurate or right, but probably because they've lived in a part of the world that's been persecuted, they've kind of stuck to their theological guns in a pretty straight line going back. I mean, they trace their heritage to St. Mark. They believe Mark went down to Ethiopia and Egypt and stuff and brought the gospel to them. But they grew up, if you will, their version of Christianity grew up somewhat isolated comparative to some of the other ones. Early on, not as much as later on, but they're kind of the forgotten Christians. It's too bad.
Do they have the Ark of the Covenant?
They say they do.
That's what I remember about them.
Yeah. The U.S. government thinks it has it in a warehouse, so who's right? I'd say.
I think we'd be winning more.
How did we get here? How did we get here?
It's right next to the Shroud of Turin, Adam.
Adam must do an episode on the Shroud.
That's funny. So I'm gonna maybe rewind us just a little bit here to my dad's sort of discussion on the ecumenical movements and its relationship to Catholic, because one of the ways I see this topic emerge the most is out of an expressed anxiety for unity again, and that the term if the church could unite again that would get adopted is Catholic. Like Lutherans would drop Lutheran and take Catholic, and I see a decent amount of Lutherans sort of do this, and maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel no anxiety for this supposed future unity that the church will have, and maybe I'm just like a callous and just too proud to be Lutheran or something like that. But I feel like reading the New Testament, even you see the division, and I don't want to call it division in the sense of like really breaking the church apart, but you see disagreements arise even in the Pauline epistles and in Acts, and the degree to which those are worked out, and then people stop ever teaching differently from one another or interpreting differently from one another seems unrealistic given the human condition. And then you see the fathers, and you see the early church, and then you get all the way to the Reformation. And to me, this idea that there was always just one group of people confessing the exact same things is just it's a myth that I don't see how people buy into, but I know a lot of Lutherans that do sort of buy into. There was a continuation, and the break is very sad.
Do you think Caleb, behind that though is actually something deeper? And I'm not trying to do any psychoanalysis, but would I see?
Here comes the psychoanalysis.
Yeah, here it comes. Because hey, come on now. But this isn't psychoanalysis because it's pretty overt. Often it's more of an admiration for this myth that this liturgy has been handed down untarnished, unaltered for
now you're speaking my love language.
Years. Yeah, I know. So, and then there's all these other explanations given after the fact, and which I think is bizarre because maybe it's the algorithm I get, but man, I'm amazed. You can for sure. Like, I guess 2 years ago, I was in Salt Lake City with our friend David, and we were just milling about downtown, mixing it up with Mormons, having ecumenical dialogue. Just kidding. We were in downtown Salt Lake City, and he brought me to the cathedral, I guess it is, and just to show me it. You can step into, like there in San Juan Capistrano, you can go in the basilica there just to kind of check things out, right? And it's beautiful. And he said something to me. He goes, when I go to church on Sunday, this is when he was attending the local LCMS church wherever he lives there in Salt Lake City area. He says, sometimes I'm not sure if I'm at a Walmart or a church, because it was an aesthetic comment, that it just, meh. And then you walk into this building, this sacred building for Catholics, where their priority is loud and clear, because they put their money where their mouth is when it comes to stuff. But so you got that sort of thing, but it doesn't take. You don't have to look very far to see that the idea that there's this preserved liturgy and it's all the same everywhere is total baloney. I mean, you've got like interpretive dancers, or what are the liturgical dancers carrying rainbow flags down the aisle in Catholic
We've
churches.
had that at LCMS youth gatherings too.
Not rainbow
flags?
please.
Oh no, not rainbow flags.
okay.
Sorry, LCMS people.
Say,
I was just meaning liturgical dance.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, whatever. Well. Yeah, I'm not saying anything about that.
I don't mean rainbows. I don't need all the LCMS people out there. I know there was no rainbows, just liturgical dance.
I can't wait to clip that one.
Yeah, dude, Trump style. No rainbows, just dance. No rainbows, okay? No fake news, just dance. So, yeah.
Well, and I think, too, churches have always had, I mean, we live in the era of the internet. We can see everything that everybody's doing because also everybody, I mean, ironically ourselves here, film themselves doing everything. Okay, and then
including eating dinner at pizza.
Yeah, including eating dinner at pizza last night. Somebody was filming themselves, and so you can see everything happening at every church in the world, and so you can see this difference play out. You can see that not every Roman Catholic church is the same, and not every Roman Catholic church is a cathedral either, to people who are so aesthetically pleased by it. Sometimes they look just like the Lutheran church in small Midwest town that looks like a Walmart. It's the same thing. And sometimes there's a Lutheran church in a small Midwest town that's a beautiful brick building that's 120 feet tall.
There are also Roman Catholic churches that bought into the church growth stuff and started opening up mission churches in malls and stuff like that. So the ecumenical thing is funny to me in a sense, because I see the problem with it is that it's when you start trying to figure out all the places where we can agree, the biggest point of disagreement, and this is always what Paul is arguing about, the biggest point of disagreement is always the overlooked one, which is the gospel itself. And what is the gospel? And so everybody in these ecumenical movements run around saying the gospel, the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. We're going to protect the gospel. But that gospel can mean social justice. That gospel can mean sort of Christian piety. That gospel can mean the actual gospel, kind of 1 Corinthians 15, 1-6 style. Christ died and rose again according to the scriptures to forgive your sins.
It can mean the gospel and.
Yeah, it can mean the gospel and so what they start like giving up on, or what they, everybody keeps their definition of the gospel. They're never really forced to fight over that. And what ecumenical ends up meaning is that, okay, we're just going to overlook the most important things and sort of shave the edges of the least important things so that we can come together in a meeting. And then at the end of the day, to do something that is usually very social justice-y and or, community ethic driven in some way, and not the actual proclamation of the gospel. Because if you never work out what the gospel is, you're never going to actually talk about how do we go out and proclaim it, because you're all going to be saying different stuff. So it's focused on something else. And that's every sort of ecumenical movement that I've come across in my lifetime has done some version of that. And when you read, back, that's what's typically happens. How do Roman Catholics and Lutherans come together on anything if they're not finally figuring out justification together?
They make the joint declaration on justification. That's what they do.
Exactly. Which is then just, at the end of the day, is just really Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
But, I would add, just as this is totally on the aside, just to clarify I don't think we're saying that there isn't space in the left-hand kingdom issues of life, right? Where
To work together with other
yeah,
Christians.
No, sure,
yeah,
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
but we're
But
talking.
just stop
we're
calling
talking
it the-
specifically about doctrine.
Yeah,
here.
stop calling that the gospel, though.
Right.
Like I'll walk hand in hand with a Catholic, a Presbyterian, and a non-denominational Christian on the issue of protecting life in the United States, life in the womb in the United States, and happily then go to 3 or 4 different churches on Sunday, right? Like that's
Well, there's all sorts of things out there like that. Like
Yeah.
you don't actually need to, I guess, agree on everything to feed the hungry or to go to a pro-life march or whatever, But that's not. Then why have sort of an ecumenical movement that's not going to touch justification? And why kind of get together and come up with some sort of statement anyway? Why not just say, hey, we all think that abortion is murder, so we're going to come do this march, and that's the extent of the statement then.
In my experience, I mean, there might be 2 different kinds of. There's probably more than 2, but from what we're talking about, there might be 2 different ways that people who are pro-ecumenists sort of process it. And one way might be the way that I'm hearing you guys kind of talk about, which is like this desire for and doing worship and good works together. But in my experience, which is anecdotal, but the ecumenists I know, their ecumenism comes out of sort of a grief that the church is divided over things that oftentimes they feel they're too divided over. So the ecumenists I know are never going around saying, you know what, the Catholics and the Lutherans and the Episcopalians, they all just need to disappear and dissolve into one. Those aren't the ecumenists I know. They recognize the need for denominational, but they feel that those differences often do more harm than good in the church working together. Those who aren't against us are for us kind of thing. So when it's put to good use, which it would be, I think, like what Scott's saying, in doing works of mercy or supporting pro-life or sanctity of marriage or something like that a lot of people can get behind, then it shows a sort of universal Christian witness to certain things, which I think is valuable, and it's better than saying, well, we're just, these are our ethics, but they're not Christian ethics. They're just cultural ethics, and we're on this side of it. So I see the image of ecumenicalism there. When I was a pastor, I was part of the clergy council in town, which was all Christians and the Jews. There was a temple represented there. It was funny. The Mormons wanted to join, and the council said no. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they were like, "Oh no, they're not like us." And
you're like,
I'm
aren't the Jews not like us?
And I was like, well, what do you? I'm just not arguing for or against here. I just don't understand.
Just to be clear for the listeners, agreed, right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
And
they're a Christian cult at the end of the day.
And they were all like, no. Their beliefs are too crazy for all of us. And the Jewish rabbi, who's actually a nice guy, he was a cool guy. He was very down to earth. He was a Navy SEAL like Adam. He's retired, and he became a rabbi. And he's like,
did he do jujitsu?
He's like, they don't even believe in the God of Abraham and Isaac like we do. He's like, we're not having them here. They're crazy. And so I just thought it was funny that even on like
did you go and you deny our Messiah?
No, the rabbi was a Shakespeare expert as well, so he was always quoting Shakespeare. But anyway, it was.
What the heck does that have to do with anything?
Well, it's a nice factoid. It gives you some context.
Oh, okay.
To the story. But in any case, I went one time to an ecumenical Thanksgiving service that they did because it was a secular holiday. So I'm like, all right, I'll see what this is all about.
By the way, for all the LCMS pastors twitching out there, Bruce was not an LCMS pastor. So
no, and I didn't participate in it. I just attended it because I was curious. And they did like a Jewish song, which was very like, thank God for everything. It was from the Psalms. And then all the different Christian groups had their prayers and other stuff. And so in that sense, there wasn't anything there at that particular service that would like disturb any Christian conscience or anything. But it also was just something where I was like, nah, I don't really want to like have my church participate in this, which is what they wanted from me. But when they wanted to do stuff in the community together, as over kind of left-handed kingdom stuff, we were always willing to participate with that. And I found that in that sense, the solidarity of going as Christians, that is, as the culture perceived Christians, to take a stand as a collected group on that was, I thought, a good thing. But again, I think their motivations, at least the ones I dealt with a lot, were like, hey, like, it's just so easy for us to be like, you're not like me, so I'm not going to work with you at all. And that's not really a Christian thing either. That was where they were more coming
So
from.
all of the ecumenical machinations that I've been familiar with have been on the academic side, and they're always trying to work out doctrine, and they're always like, and it is oftentimes like, hey, I get it, because of cultural and historical and comfort reasons, we're all still going to have our denominations, but is it really necessary for us to have all these different actual beliefs? And so they come together and they try to like smoosh together different beliefs. And the thing that I've always noticed is that it's like in the Joint Declaration on Justification. It's like you smoosh some things together, where at the end of the day, because it's not, the primary goal is not to protect the gospel. The thing that's always going to get smooched the most is the gospel.
Yeah.
And so
Smooched.
you'll incorporate some, Lutheran-esque words into it.
Yeah,
Like,
they'll be like, we all like grace.
we all love grace.
Yeah.
We all love faith. Who doesn't like grace and faith? Come on now. And then, or Jesus. We like Jesus. You love Jesus. I love Jesus. Come on. Why can't do the Rodney King thing? Why can't we all just get along? But then when the doctrine actually gets worked out, it's because we're all sinners and we all lean towards works. It always like gets off of justification by grace alone, through faith alone, on account of Christ alone, to God alone goes the glory, and more towards like, yeah, but you got to do something, right? Well,
Do you guys think
gotta
of like
do
the
something.
mainline denominations, though, that Lutheranism is particularly more sensitive to this than the others? Because when I look at, I feel like Lutherans are more of all the mainline groups. I feel like Lutherans are more like, nah, I don't want to play in the sandbox.
Yeah, I don't want to play in the sandbox either.
Well,
because
I'm gonna
we also
also
have a book of confessions. It's like 600 pages
Maybe
long.
we needed
you
this
know?
one also, but like per my last episode, Missouri Synod is technically not a mainline church. It might be a mainstream
I
church
just
in the
mean
cultural
Lutheranism
conscience.
in general.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's on a train kick. I'm about to take him to a train museum. But at the end of the day,
Well, mainline has also became the counter to fundamentalism on the liberal side. So we never
yeah.
I mean, confessional evangelical Lutheranism was never mainline.
So here's my sort of this is anecdotal from a book I'm currently reading. But you guys always give me stuff for not reading more theological books. So I'm reading a book on Bonhoeffer, but even when he comes over to the United States, right? He's a Lutheran pastor. He comes over to the United States, and his ecumenical leanings are such that he's at Union Theological Seminary. He can't stand the liberalism there or sort of the counter fundamentalism there. And so instead of trying to, find among his own kin where he might find right doctrine and evangelism, maybe in the LCMS or the Buffalo Synod or something like that, he, goes to Southern Baptist churches. And he's so like, everything falls out at that point. And he's like, I finally learned theology when I heard a Southern Baptist like preacher preach. And it's
You know
like,
what else happened down there with him?
okay.
He fell in love with gospel music.
I know he did. Yeah, he started collecting a collection of it. And so
Yeah.
some of that's great, but he didn't, his ecumenical nature didn't really do much to promote the gospel as the gospel. It ended up promoting, as far as I can tell, the gospel as, I'm not saying he didn't believe the gospel, but as he sort of explicated it, it very much came to the gospel as worked out in your life of faith through social justice. And okay, but what suffers in that scenario is going to be the message of the gospel itself. And that's sort of, again, that's when people lean too hard into Catholic or ecumenical. This is what I see happen. I mean, and I guess most of my experience with this is sort of knowing ELCA-ish type people my whole life. And that's sort of always where they go. I was going to say the most like honestly, ecumenical meetings that I know of personally were initially when the North American Lutheran Church formed in like 2010, something like that, maybe 11. They had serious meetings with the LCMS regarding, I think I wasn't in the meetings, but it seems like that they were to see whether or not there could be altar and pulpit fellowship between the NLC and the LCMS. And the reason those were good ecumenical meetings, in my opinion, is because they both had a solid understanding of the gospel and that they weren't going to give that up. And now it was on other things. And they ended up not having any kind of fellowship like that. And I think it was over women's ordination and sort of the evangelical Catholic leanings of the NALC. Again, I wasn't there. I don't know for sure. But those seem like at least honest ecumenical kind of meetings.
Where no is always on the table,
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh, we're just gonna where the unstated assumption is we're going to do these things despite our obvious differences. Yeah.
And I'd still say to this day, you have the issue of women's ordination, which is a big one, but to this day, it's still sort of the closest sort of besides like Wisconsin Synod and stuff, they're very conservative, sort of inter-Lutheran conversations between people that came from a very liberal denomination and sort of arguably the most conservative denomination of Lutheranism, able to have these talks because at the end of the day, they did seemingly center on the gospel.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking, like somebody who's really part of a real ecumenical movement, like in academia, hearing that the most ecumenical thing you ever experienced was two Lutherans talking is just like, it's classic Lutheranism in a lot of ways, which is
I guess I gotta stay where I live. I did know the person and the husband of the person that was the director of the Ecumenical Center in Strasbourg for years. But it wasn't, a couple who were ELCA clergy.
yeah.
And so on that side, because it very much is oftentimes more socially related. That sort of side of Lutheranism is always more inclined towards it than the theological side.
Yeah.
Can I virtue signal? Can I virtue signal my ecumenism as opposed to Scott's faux ecumenism? I was once part of a. I don't know if they officially called it interfaith, but it was a universalist, an atheist, a Muslim.
Wow, that is interfaith.
And you,
a Jew, and well, they invited. Like, I saw this was when I was living in Fort Wayne, and they were doing these things. I went once just to see, and I was just, my stomach.
Did you all walk into a bar?
No, yeah. My stomach was turning at how awful the Christian representative was, because it was some, I won't, it was like think like pink-haired lesbian priestess from the United Methodist Church or something like that.
I was going to say Episcopal, but I wasn't far off.
Well, yeah, but, and just whatever, do your thing, I guess. But the way she confessed Christianity made it seem like it was kind of Islam and like Marxist at the same time. And so finally, I knew one of the guys on the panel, and he asked if I'd ever participated. I was like, yeah, I'm doing this. And it was so funny because it ended up the atheist in the group. He knew me. He was a student or faculty. I guess he was faculty, maybe a grad student at IPF, the local public university there. And like he wanted to fight, not physically, but he was like, why is he here? And this is like in front of like about 300 people at the Fort Wayne Library auditorium. And it got ugly pretty quickly. But I just smiled. But that's my ecumenism.
Yeah.
Real ecumenism.
Real ecumenism.
Not,
It ends
not
in a fight.
two Lutheran groups.
I'm seeing you guys have all told ecumenical stories.
You are ecumenical every other week.
I am ecumenical every other week. Yeah, I meet at a non-denominational homeschool co-op. And help teach. I took over. Adam's gonna like this. I took over teaching the apologetics side because they were doing sort of science as apologetics, and that really bothered me pretty deeply, because the science was getting pretty misrepresented in some of the lessons I had seen, and the apologetics was then basically just, know that the Bible's true and science is wrong, which was not I don't think a great thing to send people out into the world with. So kind of helped take over that. And it's definitely interesting. I don't really want to talk ill of anybody at it, but I probably have the hardest time. There are Catholics there. There's 3 Lutheran families. 3 of our families from the church have children there. There's people from the community non-denominational church, people from the Calvary Chapel, and people from one of the Baptist churches there. So it's pretty much representative of our valley. None of the like progressive churches. There's only
They don't homeschool.
Yeah, they don't homeschool. That makes sense now that you said that. But I haven't been prepared for how when certain. So I've taught like the chapel before that too, and my version of being ecumenical is to just not over teach on subjects where I know there is vast disagreement. So like I know that most of the children at the homeschool co-op aren't baptized. This bothers me deeply, but I just don't use references like remember your baptism to these kids, because I think basically my kids and the Catholics are probably baptized. And so I avoid that kind of thing.
Which is why when we have Jared Wilson speak at Here We Still Stand, we don't say, hey, can you do a talk on the Lord's Supper?
Yeah. But what I've noticed is like the non-denominationals, their version of being ecumenical is they think that their Christianity is the most simple form, and everybody agrees basically with the simple version that they have. Everybody adds on to it. So they'll teach something about the Lord's Supper and not know, like that it's a representation where you're letting Jesus into your heart. And don't you kids know that when you take grape juice and crackers at Sunday school, that's what you're doing? Not knowing that I'm having a literal stroke.
Wait, do they take grape juice and crackers at Sunday school?
No, they're referring to when they do it at church.
Okay.
Not at my co-op.
A
not
literal
a co-op.
stroke or a metaphorical stroke?
No, I think one of them was literal. I think.
I felt the Holy Spirit grieved in my person. So,
Caleb's blasphemy.
Yeah. And it's kind of amazing because, if you go talk to somebody else about that was bothersome to you, they have no clue. It's just like, well, everybody believes that you're accepting Jesus into your heart when you take communion. Even Lutherans believe that part of it, and you're like, no, not at all. So it's definitely interesting, because what it's proved to me is if you got to those hard doctrines, though, like if I said, if I were to say something about the real presence, I would offend people, or infant baptism. And so like my dad said, when it gets to the really serious stuff, like if I talk about faith and grace and even law and gospel, there's a lot of appreciation for the basic definitions of all those words.
I've had this experience as well.
There is the appreciation shuts off immediately when that doctrine becomes much more specific or narrow, and you say something like that might be perceived as antinomian, or might be perceived as as too sacramental. And then people will say, "Oh yeah, you Lutherans are Catholic light. You guys you're Catholic, but you're not.
You're not quite Protestant."
Yeah.
Speaking of homeschool co-ops, so I've been teaching at one for about 3 or 4 years. There's 2 Lutheran families and about 100 mostly non-denom types.
Dang, that's a big
Catholics.
co-op.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
it's huge. It's awesome. Kids get to do chemistry. I taught economics. Oddly
That's
enough,
cool.
once.
That's so funny. Like all the things they could have you teach. They're like, hey, Adam, will you teach economics?
I taught economics once too, Adam. So we have that in common.
Adam can teach history, theology, apologetics,
Yeah, and I
even
was
like
like,
historical method writing.
All I want to do is I want to do a jiu-jitsu class. They're like, well, could you do economics? Fine.
I keep begging to do a basic philosophy and
Oh yeah, that's the other one Adam
class.
can teach, philosophy.
Check this out though. So I've been doing it for a while, and when it comes to in Illinois, things are starting to ramp up a little bit in terms of state intervention. And so when we've had visitors come, they're like, oh, we have somebody on our faculty who has an Oxford DPhil, and they kind of use that as like a token, I think. Well, they asked me this year to do the commencement address. Guess who I'm going to read from? Jim Nestigan, that first chapter in Free to Be, as I
Oh,
talk
awesome.
about choices.
God
So
has made
they're
a
gonna-
decision
they're gonna-
about you.
Yeah, they're going to get a full 110% or proof gospel, whether
That's
they like
awesome.
it or not. So maybe I should record it.
You should
Nice.
record it.
Do they not record it?
I don't know.
They probably
Anyway.
record it.
Adam, that's interesting. That's usually when I have an opportunity to teach outside of like the apologetics, like if I can get to do the straight theology or the chapel
Yeah.
part of it, which is actually the part I would like to do the most. But
Yeah.
um,
You just
I-
have to hang in there, and you'll get those opportunities. You know, they'll recognize that. Wow, this guy's got some. He's got a brain. He's not. He's not
well,
just
that's
pretty,
unfortunately how
He's
I've
not just
got,
a pretty face that we all know. He's got a brain too.
that's how I unfortunately got signed up for the obligations that I already have. But I choose that similar angle. I think the most easy place that I try to go is to tell the kids that God has chosen them or has died for them specifically, and there's nothing they can do about it. Kind of language, because I know that at Sunday school and at their churches, the number one thing they're hearing is that there will come a point in their life where they finally have to make a decision for Jesus. So I try to be that one voice that is already saying, Jesus has already made a decision about you.
And then you go to chapel and sing, I have decided to follow Jesus.
No, Bruce.
I'm not going to say that I've never heard that song sung in Lutheran churches
Uh-huh.
because I have.
But, well, very interesting, guys. I mean, we don't have time to, but we didn't even get to the evangelical Catholic movement, which, as I'm aware, isn't super big in the Missouri Synod by name. But
You should, if we ever do that, you should have John on. He knows it really well.
yeah,
In a way that the rest of us would just be guessing. Maybe Bruce might know it. I think it's an East Coast thing. Bruce, do you know evangelical Catholic stuff? I bet you do.
Just a little bit, probably not as much as John.
Yeah.
It's bigger in the NALC, as you sort of already mentioned, or it was, and in the ELCA before that. My only warning about that is I know that there are some Missouri Synod Lutherans who sort of just have haphazardly maybe
Like the liturgical aspects of it.
started using it, not just even for that, but because they think, like we've suggested, you should take back the word evangelical, and we should also take back the word Catholic. So let's just slam them. And I get the sentiment, and that's not the worst thing in the world. Although the confusion is that a movement has existed primarily within more liberal-leaning churches about liturgy attached to those words combined together. So I just think it would be interesting to do an episode, but you're right. We probably need Hoyam to do that. So, all right, guys. Well, any closing thoughts before I just wrap up the show?
Nope.
Nope, we're good.
Go be Catholic.
Go be Catholic. Go be small C Catholic. Don't be afraid to say it in the creed if it's how it's presented or not. So, I think you'll be fine. Well, thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Go to 1517.org to find more resources from us. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our new YouTube channel. Thank You Fellows can be found on YouTube. We've done some one-off videos.
And thumbs up.
And thumbs up the videos. But you can subscribe there. You can see video versions of the full podcast have now been rolling out for a couple of weeks. And we've also got some one-off videos, too. We did a Melanchthon one, and there's some other ones coming down the pipeline. So go and check those out. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.